This is the first introductory lecture on the first short story, The Open Window. The Open Window is a short story written by Hector Hugh Munro. His surname is Saki. So the surname of the short story writer of this story is Saki. The story is realistic. It was set in the English countryside in October, in the afternoon. There was a reference to a moorland where people hunt wild ducks. Now we turn to the theme of the story. The central theme of the story is self-deception. The other themes were deception, self-confidence, and delusion. As for plot of the story told a comic event of the central character, Frampton Nuttall, who was suffering from illness in his nerve. He went to the countryside to find cure for his nerve. His sister gave him letters of introduction to some people. She wanted to help him find a place there. He came to Mrs. Sableton's house. He was received by Vera, Mrs. Sableton's niece. She told him a fabricated story of the disappearance of Mrs. Sableton and Mrs. Sableton's brothers. She told him that Mr. Sableton and his wife's brothers went hunting in a moorland. They never returned home. She also told him about the appearance of the ghost of the three characters, Mr. Sableton's ghost, and the ghost of Mrs. Sableton's two brothers, who disappear in the moorland. She told him that Mrs. Sableton was waiting the ghosts through the window. The three characters returned from hunting. They have their dog with them. They have a spaniel dog. That was a real event. Nuttall felt horrified. He believed Vera's story and escaped. Techniques of the story, The Open Window. The writer used various techniques. He used dramatic techniques, narrative techniques, and stylistic techniques. As for irony, it was obvious in many examples. For example, Vera's name was ironic. It was derived from the Latin word which means truth. It was derived from the Latin word vertus. But Vera wasn't truthful. She told lies and a fabricated story. Vera told a false story to Mr. Nuttall, but Mr. Nuttall did not know that Vera was telling a fabricated story. Vera didn't amuse the visitor as her aunt requested her to do. She horrified the visitor, Frampton Nuttall himself. She made him escape. Vera claimed that Frampton Nuttall had phobia of dogs.
But in fact, Mr. Nuttall did not tell Vera about his phobia. Actually, he didn't tell her that story about his phobia of dogs. It was fabricated by Vera herself. Frampton Nuttall thought that the three ghosts appeared through the window, but in fact they were not ghosts. They were real men. They were human beings of blood and flesh. The countryside was supposed to provide Frampton Nuttall with cure or treatment. Instead, it worsened his case. It shocked him. The countryside didn't give Frampton Nuttall cure or treatment. Frampton Nuttall did not find cure or treatment for his nerve case. The second technique was style. The writer used various words to express one thing. So the story was distinguished by its diction, by its word selection. The writer used words that were not currently, he used words that they are not currently used. For example, self-possessed, bolted out, grabbed, shedded. So those words are not currently used. They are not used. They are not being used nowadays. Yes. He used certain words to refer to one figure. For example, he used niece and child to refer to Vera herself. So the two words, niece and child, referred to the character of Vera. He also used two words like caller and visitor to refer to one character who was Frampton Nuttall. He used the words caller and visitor to refer to the character of Nuttall. Other words included, for example, shedded, grabbed, and the white Macintosh. The white Macintosh referred to the clothes that one of Mrs. Sableton's brother used to wear. Yes. The three figures refer to Mr. Sableton and Mrs. Sableton's young brothers. So this word or this phrase, the three figures, refer to three characters, Mr. Sableton and Mrs. Sableton's young brothers. The third technique was the narrative technique. Narrative technique was obvious or clear in three techniques: flashback, ellipsis, and foreshadowing. Yes. The first technique, or the first narrative technique, was flashback. Frampton Nattel remembered what his sister told him about his case in the moorland. She knew that her brother would not get well, or his nerve case would not recover or get well. She said, I know how it will be. Yes. Nattel also remembered his sister's letter of introduction. Vera pretended that she remembered the accident in the past. She remembered when and where the three figures disappeared. That was a false remembering. Vera also pretended or acted that she remembered a false accident. That accident was horrible, a horrible experience in India. So flashback was clear or obvious in Vera's remembering, in Frampton Nattel's remembering, and Vera's false remembering. Yes. The second narrative technique was ellipsis. Ellipsis is the dropping of the incidents in the story. The narrator sometimes drops certain events owed to their insignificance or due to their insignificance. Certain incidents or events are not important or significant. That is why the narrator drops them in his recounting or in his narration of events. The narrator does not give information about Vera. For example, he does not give information about Vera's parents or Vera's life background. He does not recount anything about her life background. He does not give information about Nattel himself. For example, he did not tell where and when Frampton Nattel lived. He did not give information about his, for example, the city or country or even his origin. He just gave two references to rural retreat in October. So he even did not give information about the place itself and the year, for example. He just gave two references to place and time, or to setting. He referred to rural retreat and October month. The third technique or narrative technique, the third narrative technique was foreshadowing. This technique in the story was interrelated with Nattel's remembering of his sister's speech. She knew what would happen to her brother, and as we have just said, she told him the following speech: I know how it will be. So this speech, this direct speech, foreshadowed or foresaw Frampton Nattel's case in future. Frontenatel's case did not recover as Frontenatel's sister expected or knew. As for the other dramatic techniques, they include dialogue and conflicts. Dialogue in the open window had three functions. The first function of dialogue was the presentation of characters. It presented Frontenatel's character, Vera's character, and Mrs. Sableton's character. So it presented the character traits of these three characters: Frontenatel, Vera, and Mrs. Sableton. It also presented Vera's fabricated story. So how was Vera's fabricated story presented or exposed in the story? Vera's fabricated story was presented or exposed through Vera's dialogue with Frontenatel. The third function was the presentation of the setting itself. It presented the time and place of the story. As for conflict, Frontenatel had two conflicts. He had an internal conflict with himself. It was an internal conflict. He struggled with his obsession and fears. That was his internal conflict. It was a psychological conflict. Frontenatel had an external conflict with his social surrounding. He was not sociable. He was isolated. He was not involved in his social surrounding. He was detached from his social surrounding. What was the proof that made Frontenatel have external conflict? The proof was the message or letter that Frontenatel's sister gave to her brother. She introduced or presented his external conflict, yes, through that letter. So Frontenatel's sister hinted to Frontenatel's external struggle or external conflict with his social surrounding. There was the technique of symbol. Symbol had certain meanings in the story. To Vera, the open window symbolized the escape from her world. Vera invented her imagination story. So telling imaginative story was Vera's resort to escape from her reality. It was her resort to escape from her world. The open window was symbolic to Mrs. Sableton. Mrs. Sableton used to sit and look at the window in order to notice the arrival of her husband and her 2 young brothers from hunting. Therefore, the open window symbolized suspense and anxiety to Mrs. Sableton. It symbolized fear and terror to Mr. Nuttall. So the open window had a symbolic meaning to Frampton Nuttall. It symbolized fear and terror to him because he thought that the 3 ghosts came to him through the window. He thought that the 3 ghosts would come to him through the window rather than would come through the door. He believed Vera's story of the 3 ghosts. Yes. So the window, the open window, symbolized fear and terror to him. That was all about the techniques used in the story.